That's pretty rare for us to have to do. Okay? And so this change, so not only do we need to know what these girls' requirements are, but how does Mother Nature or the forage coincide with those requirements? Okay? Let me just take a second to lay this out for you. So we have crude protein. This is forage analysis. And so have you guys, who all has ever seen one of those cows with the big hole in her side? We heard Dr. Doolittle talk about one of our grad students that got tetanus from doing those surgeries. He survived. He's doing well. He's living in Colorado now. Walks with a limp, but I don't think that's associated with that. We take those cows. We've got a resident herd here at Corona. We take them out on in the corral, empty that rumen out, rinse it out 3 or 4 times with water to where you could eat off of that rumen wall. Not that I would, because it's still gross, but it's clean, really clean. And so we send them out for about 45 minutes to an hour to graze the rangeland, bring them back in, and we pull it out, and it smells like fresh cut grass. So those of you that have been around those cows, they stink, right? And that's the gases that are coming from fermentation. But they can do a much better job than any one of us can going out and saying, well, I know she'll eat a little of this, and she won't eat this because it's dead. But we consistently see 3 to 6% more or higher quality when we do it this way than we do when we just go out and clip for ourselves. Very impractical. But what we're trying to do with a lot of these studies is see, how does our supplementation program influence how they graze? Are they more selective or are they less selective? But that's neither here nor there. In this data set, we've got over 18 years of those kinds of studies where we emptied out the rumen in March, in April, in May, June, July, and so on. And what I've got here is kind of the highest value we ever found from those cow samples, the lowest and kind of the average. All right, so there's missing data here and there, so it's not perfect, but what I'm saying is this kind of gives you a sense, or gives us a sense of how much variation can we expect from year to year, in a good year, in a bad year, an average year. And so we've got the high, average, low, and then this black line are the actual NRC requirements for those heifers. Okay? So basically I've taken the data that I showed earlier and then just overlaid it with this. Okay? And so what I've done is now I've highlighted important times in that heifer's life. May is going to be her first breeding season. That's when we start here, May 15th. And then, depending on how good we do with our AI, and we're going to start late January, February, March is going to be her first calving season. And then we're going to start breeding her second time in May and June, and then we have her second calving season. Okay, so you kind of get a sense of where are some key timelines, and so knowing our calving dates, our breeding season, and things like that. And as you can see, we're kind of bass-backwards on how we run these heifers, right? Because ideally, we'd want her peak nutrient requirements to fall right in here, right? So really, it seems like for that heifer, in that first year, we should back them up. But you can kind of guess that once she becomes a cow or starts entering the mature cow herd, she's going to start to fall closer in line with that forage production or forage quality. So what we say is we're calving in sync with nature, all right? And so obviously, in the dead of winter, we're supplementing those girls pretty heavy. And then when we get into that May, June calving or breeding season, chances are we're starting to get grass to grow, warming up. Now there's times where there's not enough moisture to really get it started, so we'll see them grow like gangbusters for about 2 weeks, and they start chasing the green, and then they got to go back to that dry if we're really not producing a lot of grass. So our animal performance really goes up and down in some years. Okay? Now this is interesting. This is energy. Remember, TDN is equal to energy. What the heck? Our grass, even in the best year, meets our requirements 1, 2, 3 times of this 2-year cycle. How do we even keep them alive? I don't have to supplement them energy throughout this entire time. This is where coming from New Mexico is advantageous to you guys because you put a lot of selection pressure on your cow herd. Now these requirements that we're talking about here come from a book called the NRC. National Research Council puts out this nutrient requirements of beef cattle. They have a document for dairy cattle, for dogs and cats, laboratory animals, horses, whatever animal is important to us. They've got documents that summarize all the research that's ever been done in the history of mankind, and they put together these tables. Well, a lot of this work was done in the Midwest, East, so Cornell, Illinois, places like that. If you look at where this data came from, those cows are quite a bit different than ours, right? And so we put pressure on, so if a cow needed this much energy throughout the year, she would have been gone. And so we've put natural selection pressure on ones that can fall within. And so I don't worry too much about what this graph looks like. But now when we move into the cow, you can see a little better what I meant about calving in sync with nature. In that, based off of our forage analysis, those cows' growth requirements or nutrient requirements fall pretty close to where we see our grass each year. All right? Now, not everybody has a cannulated cow, nor do you want one. But over time, you could start to sample your grasses and start to develop your own curve so you kind of sense, okay, on our ranch, we never have really good grass during May or June because our monsoonal rains don't really come until this time or whatever. You can start to play with when do I need to turn bulls out so I can try to minimize how much supplement I have to provide. Okay, and again for the cows we see the same sort of energy issues. Again, we don't worry about it a whole lot. Okay, and so now what I want to do is just kind of focus a little more because that's kind of confusing with all of those things, all the different lines out there. And so essentially I've eliminated the 3 forage quality and just replace it with, so our average forage quality, all right? We hope we see a nice average. And so the green line is our average forage quality, and the black line is the same as the cow's nutrient requirements, okay? And so when we get this month since calving, all right, and this is actually in pounds per day, and so I've taken into account her intake, right? We've got to take everything back because they don't require percentages, they require actual quantities. And so it looks pretty much the same, but for the most part, we've got to be supplementing here anytime that green line falls below. So even in an average year, as we're heading into that 3rd trimester, which, if you forget anything else I said, that this 3rd trimester of pregnancy is the most important time in that cow's life nutritionally. Because if we can have her in decent shape going into calving, that's going to have more of an impact on reproduction than trying to play catch up. Once she calves in poor condition, it's very difficult to get her in really good shape in time for breeding season after that time. So that 3rd trimester, we've got to make sure we're feeding them appropriately. All right? So high forage quality, all right? This is a pipe dream for us here in New Mexico, but every once in a while it happens. We see that really there's only 2 months out of the year that we had to supplement because it's right there on the line. I probably couldn't get Shad to supplement at that time, but we're not afraid to let a cow lose a little bit of body weight, but for the most part we're trying to meet their needs exactly. And then low, okay, that's a no-brainer there, right? And so having this documentation, or at least an understanding of, all right, we only got a couple inches of precip during the winter. This spring's been pretty dry. Our grass looks like crap. We're probably in that low forage quality mode, so we've got to really be careful as to how much supplement we put out. When I say careful, I mean we got to make sure we have enough, but I'm opposed to overfeeding that protein, right? So what I've done here, and I'll give you guys, if anybody's interested, there's about 130 slides here, but I go through them pretty fast. But if anybody's interested in these handouts, I'll be sure, shoot me an email and I'll get them to you, because what I really like is I basically summarize all that stuff. And so this is where if you're sitting down to figure out how much protein you've got to supplement or how much supplement, these are the tables that you want. This table and this table. The only difference is I've got this in pounds and this one's in percentages, all right? So if you see a load of hay sitting on the side of the road with a for sale sign on it, looks really good. If you're the guy, hopefully you get an analysis on it, or you can kind of guesstimate. If you think about that heifer, if that hay can be 7% crude protein and 50% TDN, you're golden. As long as she's eating 19 pounds a day, you don't need to supplement her. I mean, that's what that's telling you. And that's what's nice about these percentages. But you've got to make sure she's eating that 19 or 20 pounds a day. Okay? And so it's really not as high as we think. And that's what's nice about being down in Las Cruces in the Mesilla Valley. There's a lot of alfalfa being produced. Most of the good stuff goes to the dairies, but if they get a stripe on it or it gets rained on, the dairies don't want it, but chances are it's well above 7% crude protein. And so we can get it pretty cheap, right? So you don't have to get that dairy quality hay. They don't need 18 pounds or 18% protein. Rarely does even a cow at 1,200 pounds producing 20 pounds of milk, at the most she needs a 10% crude protein. Now, remember, if they're not eating what they're supposed to, then you've got to start to kick it up, right? If they can't consume enough or they're not consuming enough, that's when that needs to go up to that 15 to 18% protein, okay? And so we've got this TDN, so it makes sense. Remember, as that calf starts to develop in utero, that third trimester, so she's upwards, that heifer, we need almost a 60% TDN forage out on the range. Now, when it looks green like I showed that one picture, we were there. But if it's brown, you are probably not there. You're going to be in the mid-50s if we're just starting into a drought, and probably low 50s if where we're at right now. Okay? And then that mature cow, that second trimester, that's right after weaning. She's dry. She's not worrying about that calf. That goes down to some pretty low quality forage. And so now's the time where she can start to put on some body condition for that third trimester, right? So rather than cutting corners and, if she comes in over fat, then okay, that's fine to let her lose a little weight. But now's the time to try to get her up so that when you get into this third trimester and this lactation and breeding, where your natural rangeland probably isn't going to meet their energy requirements, having some body condition. So remember, that fat is an energy reserve. So if you can't provide it in the diet, she's going to get it one way or another, and she's going to start to mobilize her fat reserves. And that's the way God made them, and that's fine. But it can have detrimental effect on breed back, all right? And we'll talk a little bit about that later. Okay, and so again, this cow producing 20 pounds of milk, 8.6, and during that first trimester, that's usually when our grass is starting to green up, we got no problem, right? 54% TDN. That's why Shad can get away with pulling that supplement out. And then we've got that 10% and upwards of 60% TDN, okay? Now, when you start to formulate it, those percentages don't do you any good. Now, we're going to guesstimate or estimate intake, but this is what we're actually going to be looking for. Well, how many pounds do they really require? And so look at this cow here. 2.8 pounds of protein. So that's not 2.8 pounds of a 20% cube. That's 2.8 pounds of protein, all right? So that cube is only 20%. And so that's what we're going to go into next, is how do you take the data from this table and equate that to, on the ground, what are we going to feed today? All right? So let's start with this, okay? I asked the question, well, how much forage is out there? All right? Most of you guys have a great eye, way better eye than I have as far as knowing how much grass do my pastures have at this time. And the range folks have done a good job. At least, you go out and clip, or you can make ocular assessment of how much forage is out there. And so if we base what are the forage intakes going to be off of the previous slide, so we're at actual pounds, okay, and so 19 pounds up to 25 pounds, 27 pounds for this big old girl. And so I put it on a per month basis, so close to 648 pounds per month for a 1,000-pound cow producing 10 pounds of milk, 1,200 pounds, close to 770 pounds per month, all right? Now, granted, this is going to go down. So I'm trying to use worst case scenarios. So this would be when it's the highest, she's producing the most milk. But for the most part, we see quite a bit of difference, but she's going to wean us a bigger calf, right? So she can eat a little more, and that's fine, provided we have that available. Now, where we have to spend some time is going out and assessing, well, how much forage do I have? Now, in worst case scenario around here, we can see 100 pounds per acre. Last year at the college ranch, so the Chihuahuan Desert Rangeland Research Center outside of Cruces, they were coming up with estimates of like 25 pounds per acre. That's usable forage. I got more on the bottom of my shoe than what some of those pastures had, and that's 64,000 acre ranch that can run about 50 cows. Okay, so in a worst case scenario, at 100 pounds per acre, that individual cow is going to require 6.5 acres per month. Okay, if we think about it on a ranch size, and so now you can start to think about stocking rates. And this is nothing new to you guys. I know you do this on a daily basis, especially if you have Forest Service or BLM allotments, things like that. Now, if we look at this 500 pounds per acre, so a little more breathing room, it goes from 6.5 down to an acre and a half, acre and a third per cow per month. All right, so things are a little better here. Now, if we had a 500 cow herd, we would need 650 acres versus 770. Okay, again, now we're starting to understand, especially when we get into a drought, what do we need to sell? What can we support? Now, if I switch that to 100 pounds per acre, all right, see what I did there? So we're at 500 pounds, advance the slide. If we're in that drought situation, look how that goes up to 3,000 acres for that 500 cow herd for a month. Yikes. All right? So that's pretty significant. And so in these drought situations, this is like the red flag here. If we're getting to this point, we've got to start shipping animals, right? And in 2011, 12, 13, we almost became a hobby farm here where we had about 60 cows that were going to stay and the rest were going to see ya. But fortunately, Mother Nature gave us some relief, okay? So we're going to go through the assumption that we've got adequate grass. We understand this and what the difference between that 1,000-pound cow and that 1,200-pound cow as far as land requirements, okay? So, like I said, I'm from Missouri, so I'm super simple. If it's brown, it's going to be low in protein. If it's green, it's going to be high in protein. And then I've got this perfect extension answer, or at least comment, sometimes, right? The perfect extension answer is, it depends. Because this came to bite me in the tuchus a couple years ago where we got some really strong rain, grew grass, it was green. I ran some analysis on it. It was 5% protein. It looked beautiful. 5% protein and low 50, high 40s TDN. Well, what had happened was that grass, it was warm enough, it got that shot of rain, it grew and matured extremely fast, right? So overnight it seemed like it put a head on. Then talking to Kent Mills from HiPro, he saw the same thing all over the Panhandle and other places. So just because you have green grass out there, you've got to look at the stem. Is it really stemmy, or is there more vegetative relief material? Dr. Gifford bought some grass hay in Cruces, brought a sample in, it looked beautiful, and it was crap, right? Now it produced a lot of crap when the cow ate it because it was very lowly digested, all right? And so we've got these clip samples. Sorry to air your dirty laundry, Dr. Gifford, but. All right, so we've got our clip samples and we submit them for analysis, all right? It's simple for you guys to do, and these are the kinds of reports that you're gonna get. Now, if you're working with a feed company, they're gonna do this for you for free, all right? And this costs, well, this one cost me $18, will cost Shad $18. Now, here we've got our dry matter, all right? Crude protein, and there's our TDN, all right? So there it's given me a sense of what the two things I'm most worried about as a cow-calf guy, crude protein and TDN. All right, you see these NEs and NEGs, NEMs, that's just a fancier term for energy value, but what it does is it takes into account how much is going to be lost as heat, how much the gut's going to use, things like that. But for us and you guys, this is all we worry about. All right? So this is a nice sample. December 18th of 2015, 7% protein, 57% TDN. I think my grad student found, I don't know where she got this sample, because that's a pretty good sample for our pastures here during December, but that worked out pretty good. And then I got calcium and phosphorus. And so from that I can take, all right, and this is when we like to do it in January, because that's kind of what we consider January and December our lowest point of the year. So if I can get an assessment of what our forage quality looks like then, I can make the recommendations to Shad and Richard how much to feed and what kind of supplement to buy. And then our calcium and phosphorus, because I'm really worried about phosphorus, right? Crude protein is our first limiting nutrient on rangeland. So as it starts to go into the winter dormancy, protein's going to fall below the requirements first. And then phosphorus is going to be the first mineral that they start to become deficient in. So I worry the most about that. And that's how we buy mineral, based on the phosphorus value in that. Okay? Now, we can get a little more complex. So now I've gone up to a $24 analysis. Okay, this is from the College Ranch, and we collected that some time ago. And we see forage protein, 6%. There's our TDN again, 49%. Okay, and so there's a few more numbers here, but for the most part, our crude protein, and then we've added a couple more minerals. So now we have potassium and magnesium. So now I can start, after phosphorus, potassium becomes the next